Greetings and welcome back to Chats with Emily and LearnStrong.net. We are engaged in our study of the 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson contained within the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 53, a fascinating little poem taken from Men this morning. And this poem is going to play around again with the idea that death is a journey or an odyssey. Obviously, we're thinking of our Homer. We think of Plato's Phaedo, no question. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down the left-hand side, our playlist. And I'm hopeful that you were already exposed to our introductory set of comments and to the previous 52 lectures, because so much of these poems begin to compound. And it is true. We are in a section right now where a number of the poems have to do with afterlife, questions of afterlife and death and mortality and all of that. Now, this poem is a responding to the death of a young girl and was in fact in 1891 when the poem was first published, entitled Requiem. And again, it's going to raise this question about afterlife and what happens when we lose, especially the young. Taken from men this morning, carried by men today, met by the gods with banners who marshaled her away. One little maid from playmates, one little mind from school. There must be guests in Eden, all the rooms are full. Far as the east from even, dim as the border star, courtiers quaint in kingdoms our departed are. Now, of course, this idea of being taken is in some ways going to picture death in as this unfair moment when there is an obvious loss. And Emily, as we've said several times there at Pleasant Street, Emily right out the back door had the view of the cemetery. So in some ways, death is ubiquitous in her life. But think of it also in terms of the time that we're talking about here of 1858, 1859. This is a time when lots and lots of children will pass. They will die for any number of reasons. And so here, notice, it is the immediacy of this morning. It's carried by men today. This idea of being carried immediately makes us think of Houseman to an athlete dying young, no doubt, carried on the shoulders, right? Met by the gods with banners. I'm fascinated that in this poem, gods and kingdoms are plural. Notice it's not met by God, but the gods, which obviously is going to beg the question, why wouldn't she just make this the monotheistic God, right? Notice this idea with banners could be the flowers, right? Who marshaled her away. And again, the banners and marshaling is war language. We're familiar with this already in her use of this language. And then she'll say it. One little maid. Notice the emphasis of little. From playmates to tell us she was young. One little mind, the repetition of little. From school, in other words, the loss. Every time a child dies, we are familiar with the loss and how tragic that is. There must be guests in Eden. And of course, referencing now Eden and paradise takes us back to Genesis 3. All the rooms are full. In other words, there's so many people who have lived and then passed. Far as the east from even, notice not east from west, but east from even, right? Dim as the border star, courtiers quaint. Now, this is interesting language from martial and from war language and weaponry language. We now move to the language of royalty. Courtiers quaint in kingdoms. Notice it's plural again. It's not kingdom as in heaven. In kingdoms, our departed are. Notice, taken from men this morning, carried by men today, but notice it's our departed are. I find this a fascinating little musing on what it means to lose a child. And of course, Emily herself losing a child, a relative child, her brother's child. So she's very sensitive to this idea of why it's even more tragic when a child will pass. How are we going to, deal with this one? Well, think about at 2a that often it is the case that the worst losses are the young, especially when we lose the young. At 2b, I love word choices here: gods and kingdoms, and curious, courtiers curious. I'm fascinated by that one as well. When we get to poem 117, it'll read like this: in rags mysterious as these, the shining courtiers go, veiling the purple and the plumes, veiling the ermine. So we'll obviously study that poem when we get to it. This use of the idea of royalty language. At 3a, I mentioned A.E. Houseman's to an athlete dying young. Think about the power of Ben Johnson's On My First Son. Both of these poems we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. Finally, at 3B, what do you think about the passing of the young? Has that occurred in your life? How did you deal with it? And to what degree is that even more of a tragic loss than to consider an older person dying? Thank you.